Today we're talking about the lymphatic system and body defenses and lymphatic anatomy, non-specific defenses. We'll have specific defenses in another presentation. Now, in this, I'm not going to talk that much about lymphatic system anatomy, just a really basic overview, enough that you can understand kind of how it works, but we're going to work mostly with the non-specific defenses. Let's take a look at the lymphatic system itself, and it's two semi-independent parts, that is lymphatic vessels and lymphoid tissues and organs. Now, when we say semi-independent, that means that they function on their own, but they do have interaction. Lymphatic system functions basically to recapture fluid that has leaked out of capillary beds into tissues and that hasn't been recovered by the capillaries. This allows it to take that fluid, and in the process of recuperating it, it also filters that fluid, looks for any foreign invaders, anything that might be damaging to the body, so that it can activate our immune system. The fluid that it's recovering is called lymph, and that's just the excess fluid that is carried by those vessels. The properties of the lymphatic vessels is that they are a one-way pump that ultimately bring everything back to the heart. However, in the process of going through this, they also go through lymph nodes to be filtered and evaluated. There's really no pump here. It involves muscular action. So whenever you activate a muscle, whenever you move a muscle, it clenches and squeezes these vessels, and the vessels are full of valves which allow the fluid to flow in one direction. So we've got something that looks a bit like this. We've got capillary beds, we've got lymphatic vessels, and the valves inside the vessels allow us to squeeze those vessels when we move around, which takes it to the lymph nodes. The lymph nodes then will move the filtrate on and drop it off near the heart. We have a system somewhat like this, where we have capillary beds, we have lymphatic capillaries that are scattered throughout the capillary beds, really throughout the tissues of our body. Lymphatic vessels have walls that overlap, so they are very leaky. They have flaps that will open and close, so fluid leaks into those lymphatic vessels. The capillaries are anchored in place by some filaments so they don't move around. And then the higher pressure when we move ourselves, when we activate our muscles, causes those valves to close, and the fluid gets forced along the vessels. Lymph itself, there are harmful materials that can enter lymph vessels. That includes bacteria, viruses. We also find cancer cells and cellular debris. And when we start talking about cancer cells, that's why when you are diagnosed with cancer, they will take out some of the lymph nodes to see how far it has spread. Lymph nodes themselves filter the lymph before it returns, and there are several defense cells that are within the lymph nodes. These include cells called macrophages, which we'll talk about in a separate presentation, and lymphocytes. There are some other lymphatic organs or lymphoid organs beyond just the lymph nodes and the lymph vessels. These include the tonsils, the thymus, the spleen, and something called Peyer's patches. So the tonsils act as a protective mechanism around the mouth. As we breathe in, these can trap bacteria. As we eat things, it can also trap bacteria, viruses, etc. The thymus is actually an organ that helps mature some of our immune system cells. The spleen serves not only as a organ that has lymphatic tissue in it, it also serves as a reservoir of blood. So when you start getting physically active, the spleen will kind of squeeze extra blood into your bloodstream. The Peyer's patches function along in the digestive tract, in the intestines, to capture anything that may have gotten by or past the stomach acids, which normally would destroy most any microorganism. Now let's talk about body defenses. The body is constantly in contact with bacteria, fungi, viruses, also things like splinters, other things that can cause our body harm. And we have two defense systems for foreign materials. There is the innate, which is what we're going to talk about in this presentation, and then there is the adaptive or specific defense system, which is why we don't get a cold or we don't get chicken pox twice. Immunity is the resistance to specific diseases. Now, when we start looking at the immune system, the innate consists of several nonspecific mechanisms, nonspecific being that they don't go in and pick a certain type of organism. They are barriers to us getting exposed to the organism in the first place. So first-line defenses include skin, mucous membranes, and secretions of skin and mucous membranes, which prevent bacteria from actually getting in. They're kind of the moat around the castle of our body. The second line of defense are phagocytic cells and antimicrobial proteins and the inflammatory response. And then we have adaptive or specific defenses. This is our third line. This is when we get sick, and this includes lymphocytes, antibodies, and macrophages. So let's talk about the innate. Innate defense or non-specific defense mechanisms provide a defense against a variety of invaders. They treat all invaders equally. So the skin, it doesn't matter if it's a drop of water, a bacteria, a virus, a fungi, it's going to react the same way. It responds immediately to protect body from foreign defenses, whereas the adaptive defense takes an extended period of time, which is why it can be 7 to 10 days from the point that you get sick until you start feeling better. The adaptive specific defenses are required for each type of invader, and again, we'll talk about specific defense a little later on. So innate defenses are mechanical barriers, for instance, to pathogens. These include body surface coverings, intact skin, mucous membranes, some specialized human cells which are not specific as to what they attack, they just attack whatever is not us, and some chemicals produced by the body. So here's a list of some of the things that are part of our innate defenses. First, intact skin, which forms a barrier and prevents pathogens and other substances from entering the body. When we sweat, we actually create a acidic environment on the surface of our skin. Now, the body pH is 7.35 to 7.45, so it's basic, just slightly basic. So acid will kill most of the things that could cause harm to our bodies, because most organisms live within a narrow range. So if we've got acids on our skin, they're going to kill most of the things that would live in that 7.35, 7.45 range. And then we have keratin, which is a hard or tough material that lives in the skin on the surface cells, and it provides resistance against acids and alkalis and bacterial enzymes. So you can spill a mild acid or a mild base on your skin, and it's going to protect the underlying tissues from any damage. We also need intact mucous membranes, and these form a mechanical barrier. Basically, mucous membranes are like skin, except that the cells are thinner and they make mucus. And mucus traps microorganisms, particularly in the respiratory tract or the digestive tract. Other things include nasal hairs, and you wouldn't think nose hairs would be that big a protection, but they filter out organisms, trap them in the nasal passages so that our immune system can work on them there. Cilia, which is in the respiratory tract, and cilia are constantly moving. They're wafting kind of bacteria and mucus up the respiratory tree into our throat where we swallow it. And then that goes into the stomach, where the stomach acids will generally kill most organisms. Gastric juice, then, concentrated hydrochloric acid and protein digestive enzymes that destroy pathogens in the stomach. The acid mantle of the vagina. The vagina is slightly acidic, and once again, most pathogens that are going to cause any harm to us need to live in an environment that is slightly basic. So the acid mantle will take care of most bacteria. Now, fungi actually can live in an acidic environment, and that's why you can get yeast infections. Lacrimal secretions in tears continually lubricate and cleanse the eyes and oral cavity. We have saliva, which is constantly washing over our teeth in our mouth, and it also contains some antibodies and materials that can help prevent infections for us. Second line of defense, we've got phagocytes. And phagocytes are cells that go around and eat anything that's foreign. They're not very specific in terms of what they go after. They just eat anything that they recognize as not belonging to us. We have some cells that are called natural killer cells. The inflammatory response is a protective mechanism, antimicrobial proteins, and fever. So let's talk about each of these. Phagocytes are cells such as neutrophils and macrophages. They engulf or eat the foreign material. They take it in and form a vacuole around it, and then there are enzymes that are in the organelle called lysozymes, which will merge with that vacuole, release the enzyme into the vacuole, and it'll just digest the material. Here's an example of a phagocyte, and you can see phagocyte is a white blood cell. These little things around here are bacteria, and the phagocyte goes in and actually engulfs the bacteria. The process is that it will adhere to the phagocyte. Phagocyte brings it in, and you can see this is the vesicle that we're talking about. Lysozymes merge with vesicles that have something in them that breaks it out, and then the part that it can't digest, it spits out onto its surface. And this becomes important in our acquired immune system, because these are antigen presenting cells. These materials that could not be digested are the antigens that our immune system can then develop a protection against.